Thank you, Mom, for the introduction. And I would also like to extend my thanks to Reverend Squire and the vestry for organizing this talk, as well as Alex Pearson and the technology department for making this teleconference via GChat possible. To everyone in the crowd, and especially my favorite teachers, who I believe are out there, Mrs. Billmeyer, Mr. Rosenberg, Mrs. Kanapka, and Mrs. Forstigrup, I want to wish you all Assalamu alaikum, which is the typical greeting here in Yemen. When Reverend Squire asked me to speak to you today about the ongoing political unrest in Yemen, I saw this as a great opportunity to let the EA community know more about Yemen, a truly unique country that has now become the current focal point of attention in the recent wave of revolutions in the Middle East against dictatorial governments. Before I talk about the political crisis that is confronting Yemen, I first want to give a brief description of Yemen, its places, people, traditions, religion, and economy. This is just to give some important context as to how the political situation looks from the ground. In the second half of the talk, I will focus on what are the grievances of the average Yemeni against his government, how the protests have grown since their beginning in early February, how does Yemen compare to other Arab countries that have or are facing their own bouts of political upheaval? Who are the leaders of the protests? What have been the recent developments? How has both the media and US government perceived and dealt with the ongoing protests? And finally, what might we expect to see in the near future in Yemen? I came to Yemen in a rush in early September and didn't really research beforehand all the beautiful sights and sceneries that Yemen has to offer to its visitors. I'm currently living in the old city of Sana'a, which is over 2,000 years old. The architecture here is uniquely Yemeni and seen nowhere else in the Arab world. The way of life in the old city is in many ways the same as it has been for the last 400 years. People here are not only traditional, but also more conservative socially and religiously than the rest of Sana'a. Sana'a is located right in the middle of the Haraz mountain range. It's the 8th tallest capital in the world at over 7,000 feet. The weather here is very pleasant and remains mild even into the summer months. When you travel through the Haraz, the landscape is lush and you see terraces etched out on the slopes of mountains for agricultural use, and several isolated villages. Another noteworthy region of Yemen is the Hadramaut, which lies right in the middle of the country. It is famous for the town Shibam, which 800 years ago were some of the tallest houses in the world. The rest of Hadramaut is characterized by its canyons, fertile agriculture that rests in the middle of its valleys. The third and probably most special place in Yemen is Socotra, which is an island in the Indian Ocean. It contains some of the most beautiful turquoise-colored beaches that I've ever seen. In addition, the island is remarkable for its collection of endemic species and trees that are found nowhere else in the world, such as the dragon blood tree. One can also see up close a lot of freely roaming wildlife. Yemen's people are just as unique as their country. Yemenis in general are very traditional people, and it shows even in the way they dress. The typical Yemeni man wears a white robe, a decorative dagger that is fastened at the waist, a blazer, and then a shawl draped over his shoulders. Over 90% of Yemeni women wear the niqab, which means that they are fully veiled with the exception of their eyes. One more thing that must be emphasized about Yemen's people is that they are very tribal. Virtually all Yemenis, whether urban or rural, belong to a tribe of some sort or another. Each tribe, big or small, has its own sheikh or leader. A big form of social gathering in Yemen is the wedding. One runs into weddings frequently. In the old city, weddings are held in big tents and take place in the middle of streets. Not only family and close friends attend them, the invitation is open to everyone, neighbors, acquaintances, and even wandering foreigners like myself. Also, one finds effusive hospitality in every street corner and household that you stop by. Lunch is the most important meal of the day, and I'm often invited for lunch when I run into neighbors and acquaintances during midday. Islam is deeply rooted in Yemeni society. It is certainly the most religiously conservative country in the Arab world. Many of my Yemeni students look at other Arab cultures with dismay for what they see as very liberal lifestyles that demonstrate weakness in their Islamic faith. Yemen unfortunately stands apart among Arab nations as the poorest. 40% of the population is unemployed, and the average Yemeni makes only $870 a year. In the Lebanese university where I teach English, some of the students in my class belong to Al-Khair Foundation, which takes youth from the impoverished Al-Jawf region and pays for them to learn English. Charity efforts like this are far and few in between. Education is definitely the biggest handicap that the country faces, with illiteracy more than doubling in the past 30 years. 5 million children leave school at the age of 12 and enter the labor market, like the boy you all see here tending his herd of livestock. Now that I've touched upon the many aspects of the natural and cultural richness that is associated with Yemen, I'm going to turn to the political situation here, which has been a bleak picture, though with growing room for optimism. Yemenis share many frustrations and anger against their government. For example, poverty, corruption, and the lack of true democracy. These are the very reasons that have driven hundreds of thousands to protest on the streets of Sana'a and other major cities, demanding the President Ali Saleh to leave. However, the word that most fully describes the anger among Yemenis is marginalization. People are tired of seeing a large share of the wealth from natural resources and oil captured by a few in the political elite. They are also fed up with watching others rise up to high positions of political power as a result of the right family or tribal connections. In order to have survived for over 30 years, the president has had to corrupt and benefit the few and the powerful at the exclusion of the rest. Throughout his tenure, he has bought off the support of tribal sheikhs, military leaders, and other prominent political figures. This form of corruption and its attendant marginalization of the masses are at the core of the political unrest here in Yemen. Yemen's protests started in the wake of the successful Tunisian revolution in late January. Ever since the anti-government protests began, the president has rallied his own supporters in the capital's main square called Liberation Square. Those who attend the pro-government demonstration are largely tribesmen who were sent by their sheikhs to support the president. The government has set up dozens of large tents in which these tribal supporters stay. They are also given the equivalent of $9 a day, as well as free lunch for every day that they are in attendance of the pro-government rallies. Ever since the Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak, fell on February 11th, the president's supporters have taken indefinitely the square and been camped out there for over a month as a counterpoint to the anti-government demonstrations in front of Sana'a University. The first time in which the anti-government showed viability was really February 3rd. It was called a Day of Rage and organized by young university students via Facebook. These young Yemenis wanted to start their own youth revolution and follow the 21st century model of revolution that had been implemented in Tunisia successfully and was being put into action in Egypt at the time. Tens of thousands gathered in front of the university, demanding the immediate departure of the president during this day of rage. Those who attended, aside from students, were largely middle-class Yemeni. The anti-government protests at the university died out almost immediately, and did not get a second wind until 8 days later when Mubarak resigned. Since then, the intensity organization, and sheer mass of the anti-government protests have increased dramatically. The streets that branch out from the university are lined with tents in which protesters have been camped out for weeks on end. All the billboards and light posts in the university area are full with banners and streamers. Political artwork in the form of caricatures is everywhere, and lampoons the president and his cohort of despotic Arab leaders. After the revolution in Tunisia had finished, and the one in Egypt was underway in February, I started to hear from Yemenis the statement, Tunisia yesterday, Egypt today, and Yemen tomorrow. Until a week ago, I did not think that this would be true. Yemen is very different from both Tunisia and Egypt in so many ways. However, the most important difference that made me think that a revolution here would be unlikely was socioeconomic. Egypt's middle class is much larger and more educated than Yemen's. Tunisia has the biggest middle class in the entire Arab world. I spoke a while back with a Tunisian friend who made the point that a revolution in Yemen would never happen because Yemenis are too ignorant and uneducated. To the surprise of many, the Yemeni youth that began the peaceful sit-ins and rallies in the university have managed to jump these hurdles and attract and organize the masses to their cause. Many also considered the anti-government movement at its beginning as both unsustainable and lacking broad-based support. They too are mistaken, as developments would later show. Support for the president has been steadily waning and switching to the side of the anti-government movement, especially during this month of March. Sana'a has always been a bastion of pro-government support, and people in the capital have long respected the president for the relative stability that he established over the country. Even those who were on the fence as to whether they wanted change in the government or not sided with the president simply in the interest of stability. However, now that unrest has been gripping the country more and more, the president can no longer make the claim that he's the only safeguard of stability. In the end of February and the beginning of March, the southern cities of Aden and Taiz descended into chaos with riots and destruction happening on the streets. Increasing anti-government protests here in the capital Sana'a led to violent clashes with riot police and pro-government supporters. All of this left a toll of about 30 dead and hundreds injured. As the anti-government movement garnered more popular support, it also picked up crucial backing from the political and military establishment. Earlier this month, the sheikhs of two major tribal confederacies joined the side of the anti-government protesters and rapidly assimilated among their rank and file outside the university. Just this week, the president has seen his base of support dwindling drastically. The most devastating defection that he suffered a few days ago was Ali Mohsen, one of his generals of the armed forces, who announced his support for the youth revolution and has since taken 60% of the army with him to the side of the anti-government protesters. Several of Yemen's diplomats across the world have also resigned and withdrawn their support for the president. Finally, even the presidential guard in the major cities of Taiz and Al-Hudaydah have turned against the government. In my opinion, the president's days in office are numbered, and the anti-government movement has passed the point of no return. 2 weeks ago, the government encampments outside the university were stormed by riot police, which led to the death of one and the injury of many. This incident paled in comparison to what would later occur this past Friday, March 18th. A friend of mine and I attended the anti-government rallies this past Friday in the university. And fortunately, we left the university area as soon as Friday prayers were done. On our way out, we heard distant gunshots from behind us, but didn't know what to make of them at the time. It was only until we came back to the apartment and turned on the TV that we saw what had unfolded in the university. 52 people killed and over 200 wounded by unknown gunmen firing from a rooftop. This past Friday was bloodier than any day during the Tunisian and Egyptian revolutions. It was a tragic yet unifying moment for the anti-government movement that has rallied hundreds of thousands of protesters in the university for every single day this past week. The media in general has been a vociferous supporter of the revolution here in Yemen. However, I do blame the media for exaggeration and failing to address weaknesses inherent to the anti-government movement. First of all, last Friday, the media was quick to blame the police firing upon the protesters in the university. However, when my friend and I were walking away and started to hear gunshots in the background, we were walking past police and army soldiers at that very moment, and they showed no intention of wanting to wreak havoc on the protesters. In addition, the neighborhood that surrounds the university has now seen its daily life completely disrupted. That Friday, it was very tough for us to make our way to the square in front of the university because neighbors were barricading their streets and preventing passerbys from entering. I detected a lot of hostility on the part of the neighbors whom we encountered on the way. Other eyewitnesses of the attack, who I've spoken with since last Friday, gave accounts that dovetailed with my own gut feeling. According to them, it was not the police that fired on the protesters, as the media was so quick to say, but a handful of neighbors who have become increasingly fed up with the disruption and with the disruption that the anti-government protesters have caused in their lives for the past 2 months. Finally, the media has largely overlooked the gaping leadership deficit that faces the anti-government movement. In one sense, the anti-government protesters are a motley crowd of socialists, Islamists, tribesmen, and educated professionals, all with disparate goals for a post-revolution Yemen. The politicians and army officials who have joined the protester side rouse a lot of distrust because they have benefited for so long from the very web of corruption that was created by the president. Many protesters are worried that these military and political officials are purely opportunists and hedging their bets with the side they think will win. As tribes, political parties, and military officials have joined the revolution, the students are starting to seem more like a sideshow. My fear that has not been adequately touched upon or addressed by the media is whether the youth revolution and its noble goals for a functioning civil society will be hijacked by sheikh, politicians, or generals who may want to use the revolution for their own interests. The U.S. response to the political crisis in Yemen has been one of caution. Though the U.S. supports the president for fear of the instability that could ensue his departure, it has nevertheless denounced all the attacks and abuses of protesters and repeatedly called for dialogue between the president and the opposition. In my opinion, it has been the right strategy for the U.S. to remain cautious and not jump to support one side or the other prematurely. All things told, as of now, it is not possible to predict what will happen. The president will certainly have to leave sooner or later, whether it is this month, the next, or before the year's end. He is under tremendous pressure and has lost so much support and control over the entire situation. Tomorrow could very well be a watershed moment for the anti-government movement. All today, people from around the country are flocking to the capital, Sana'a, to attend tomorrow's protest. It is expected that 2 million people will gather in the university tomorrow and march to Sabain Park, which lies at the heart of the capital. If this march does happen, it will inevitably lead to clashes between pro and anti-government supporters, as well as pit the 60% of the army that has sworn to defend the protesters against the remaining 40% of the army that still stands with the president. What will be the outcome of tomorrow's unprecedented protest? Will the president resign soon? These are all questions that will likely be answered in the next week or so. Thank you, and if there's time now, I'd love to open the floor to any questions that any of you in the student body may have. Thank you.